This episode of the Northern Miner Podcast is brought to you by Revival Gold and their Bear Track Arnett Gold Project in Idaho. If you want to learn more about Revival Gold, you can find them at revival-gold.com, and you can find them on the TSX Venture Exchange at RVG and on the over-the-counter markets at RVLGF. Feeling like summer out there. Hello and welcome once again to the Northern Miner Podcast. My name is Adrian Pocabelli, your intrepid host. I suppose an intrepid host is like an intrepid reporter. Always on top of things here, and we are looking at the U.S. 10-year bond at 1.558%. So it has drawn back. Very interesting little chart. You see a long march from August all the way up to April, with the 10-year bond really accelerating in, say, February to April. And what you've seen in the last 2 months is basically a dropping back. The trend does not seem to be broken, interestingly, but you do see it drawing back. So we continue to have this uncertainty on what direction inflation is going. If we look at gold, gold, it's really hard to, I don't think we can say too much about inflation in gold in the short term, but it is showing strength. It's at $1,894 right now. It's almost at $1,900 this morning. So that momentum continues. So all very interesting. Copper at $4.51 per pound. So it's not like prices are falling. So, my theory, at least on the crypto markets, is the summer is going to be off. We're taking the summer off. People are going to go outside and they're not going to be staring at green and red numbers on their computer screens quite as much, especially after being locked up for a year in their homes. And speaking of that, I just got my vaccine last week. I'm in Germany. And everybody always asks the first question, what vaccine did you get? And I got the Pfizer. And I could have gotten the Johnson & Johnson or the AstraZeneca earlier, but I heard enough stories about the mRNA being the kind of luxurious version of the vaccines. And again, this isn't medical advice nor financial advice, but just my sort of anecdote. So I decided it was like a 2-week wait, so why not wait? Now, what was shocking about that, though, first, it was pitched to me to get the Johnson & Johnson. Oh, one shot and you're done with it. Okay, that's great. That's pretty cool. But you know what's interesting? AstraZeneca, there was a much longer wait as far as from what other people tell me. Same with Moderna. I know people are waiting 6 weeks. With Pfizer, I get the next shot in 2 weeks from now. So I got that a week ago. So it's only a 3-week wait, which is phenomenal. And my doctor asked me, he's like, do you want to wait 3 weeks or 6 weeks? And I said, well, can I do 3 weeks? And he said, you're young and healthy, do the 3 weeks. I did the 3 weeks. So that's exciting. So are we going to be really staring at our computer screens and numbers for the next 2 months as the weather finally hits and summer takes hold? Perhaps, but I have a feeling it's just going to be, as a society, psychologically, we actually want to go out and have some real experiences. Maybe put some of that money to work in the real world by going to a nice fancy restaurant or buying a plane ticket or something. So anyway, so exciting times here. Summer is taking hold, and the mining industry seems to be just chugging along here. As we heard last week, it is in great shape, according to David Garofalo. We have a follow-on presentation this week on the cloud, and this features two of the top executives dealing with technology at some of the biggest mining companies in the world. Anthony Downs, head of digital transformation at Vale, is joined by Dean Gehring, who is executive vice president and chief technology officer at Newmont, and they talked to the Northern Miners science reporter, senior reporter Carl A. Williams at the Global Mining Symposium, and this was just a couple of weeks ago. And they talk all things about the cloud, cybersecurity, so a very prescient, topical conversation, which is probably a must-listen for mining executives out there. One of the big takeaways for me was this idea that what the cloud enables is a standardization of how you treat your data across the whole organization. And when you're dealing with a global mining company, say that works in several continents, it really does take the idea of multinational corporation to a whole new level. Because at that point, it starts to raise philosophical questions, doesn't it? If you start to have the bulk of your corporation, in other words, your data and how you process that data, your systems for dealing with that data, if that's all in the cloud, it seems to render borders just a little bit less important, doesn't it? I mean, they become truly global companies. Kind of a whole new way of thinking about it. So to me, this is a kind of a different kind of globalism. Some people say globalism is dead, but I guess it depends on your definition, right? I mean, some people would probably say it's still alive and well, but as a political term, it's dead. But as a philosophical and just a statement of fact, it seems like globalism is very much alive and well in the cloud. So who knows? Maybe I'm just being controversial here. If you have different opinions or you think I've got this wrong, just leave me a comment. I'm happy to read them. So a very exciting show coming up, and we got some Rio Tinto story, and that company continues to blow my mind with how they can't stay out of the news for the wrong reasons. It just makes me wonder, why is it always Rio Tinto? Is there a problem still at Rio Tinto? And maybe there's not, but we'll take a look at the stories. So that's all coming up. If you want to find us online, you can find us at northernminer.com. You can find us on Twitter at Northern Miner. You can find us on Instagram at The Northern Miner. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and wherever podcasts are available, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. And with that, let's turn to the news. And turning to the website, let's start with this Rio Tinto story. Serbia may decide fate of Rio Tinto's lithium project in referendums, by Cecilia Jamasmi. It says here, Serbia's President Aleksandar Vučić may seek voter approval for Rio Tinto's Jadar lithium project near the city of Loznica in western Serbia as community opposition grows. Speaking on local TV today, Vučić said the government fully supports the project, which could become Serbia's second largest export earner once developed. He also said his administration won't let it happen if it doesn't get the people's approval first. Jadar has been facing local opposition due to heritage issues. Its footprint covers the area around Palje, a Bronze Age archaeological site, as well as several classified natural monuments. So here we go, another archaeological site. Now, you would think Rio Tinto would just say anything that has anything to do with archaeological sites, we're taking a break on for the next 18 months, just because of what happened in Australia. You would think, but here we go again. So we have a quote from activist Maria Alimpic, who said, quote, "This part of Jadra and Rajavina has been inhabited for more than 8,000 years, and no one will drive us away. We will give our vote to nature, and there is no referendum nor profit that is above nature." Sort of a unusual argument. We're giving our vote to nature. Now, to be fair to Rio Tinto, maybe after what happened in Australia, the go-to narrative for the activists is simply to say, hey, this is an archaeological site, get out of here, right? So, again, if we parse Maria Alimpic's statement, it says, this place has been inhabited for more than 8,000 years, and no one will drive us away. I mean, what part of the earth hasn't been inhabited for 8,000 years? So let's just keep looking here. We're trying to be fair here, But again, like if I was the CEO of Rio Tinto, I would just be like, guys, why am I seeing headlines about us and archaeological sites? Why? And then because remember the board. Remember the board. And the board is the one who keeps putting out these kind of, morally, what I consider from a personal point of view, morally, there's a deficit of morality in the statements. It's not that they're immoral, it's just there's no kind of moral leadership from my personal perspective, from the limited documents that I have seen. Continuing on in this article, Nadamo Jadar says Rio's proposal covers 22 villages and mining is to occur under 2 riverbeds, both of which are prone to flooding. And we have a quote from Nadamo Jadar member Mariana Petkovic, and she says, quote, "We own land with archaeological remains dating back to the Bronze Age, and the area also contains classified natural monuments." And she said this at a rally in front of Rio Tinto's offices in Serbia. So yeah, this does seem like it's more than just a piece of land, right? This does seem, again, which just makes it all the more mystifying that Rio Tinto would go within 100 miles of this project after what has happened. And we have a further quote from Petkovic, quote, "How can Rio Tinto's CEO be serious about making protecting cultural heritage a center issue when at the same time in Serbia, the company wants to develop a mine that will swallow up natural monuments and heritage dating back to the 14th century BC? Well, that is exactly the question. That is exactly the question. It would be nice to hear from Rio Tinto's CEO on this. Coordinated protests against the proposed mine were held in April in London, coinciding with Rio's annual general meeting, as well as the miners' office in Belgrade and Washington, D.C. So like I was saying in the intro, my red flag here is the fact that I keep seeing Rio Tinto in these situations. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen to other companies, but as far as global mining companies, Rio Tinto is repeatedly in situations like this that always kind of, reference this sort of 80s corporate raiders mentality, which is completely out of fashion right now in a world of ESG. Like it always kind of has this, like the villain in the documentary about the mining company that is going to, develop the land of the local peoples against their will, right? Like, and this is the problem. And so the perception is awful here, and it kind of does the rest of the industry a disservice, because I think the rest of the industry, and I think the jury's out on this, but it sure raises questions, but I think the rest of the industry, to generalize, is working overtime to seem like good corporate citizens. As a whole, it's actually pretty impressive. And it only takes, a story like this to keep happening from the same company that all these old stereotypes, all that hard work, is sidelined by stories like this. So it does raise issues, again, about Rio Tinto's board, because they have put out, remember it was just only a few weeks ago, like they put out the statement that we understand that you're mad, but they didn't say anything about it being the wrong decision. It was about the former CEO's outgoing pay, his pay package. And what they said was, they didn't start with saying what a terrible thing Rio Tinto had done. They just said, we understand that you're mad. And they didn't say, we think that what happened was terrible. They just said, yeah, we understand that you're mad. And they went ahead, as far as I understand. So more questions. I mean, what's shocking to me is it's not like every 6 months we get a story. It's like every 2 weeks there's another Rio Tinto story. So let's see what happens next. A couple more stories here. BHP is paying $93 million for environmental damages at Escondida. It's also by Cecilia Jamasmi. And what have we here? BHP, the majority owner and operator of the Escondida copper mine in Chile, will have to spend up to $93 million as part of an environmental plan drawn up to resolve a lawsuit from the state over water use and related damage to a sensitive area in the country's north. The case goes back to April last year when the Chilean state sued BHP over alleged, quote, irreparable damage, end quote, to the Punta Negra salt flat in the northern Antofagasta region. The bone of contention was the mine's now abandoned practice of drawing water from the salt flat. The area is one of the many natural resources that has been depleted after decades of mining activity in and around the Atacama Desert, the driest place on Earth and nearby salt pan. You know, David Garofalo mentioned water in his talk last week that we featured, and that was, to me, one of the big takeaways. He said, when we talk about environmentalism, let's talk about water, because water is the big issue. And I don't hear that very often, but I think he's probably right. I mean, he would know more than I would, but it sounds like he's right. So, you know, another water issue. And finally on this, the country's environmental watchdog ruled against BHP in July 2020, so a year ago. It concluded Escondida, the world's largest copper mine, had caused a decrease in the water table levels greater than 25 centimeters. That is the allowed limit in the Atacama Desert, the world's driest, where the mine is located. So it looks like they took too much water. The case triggered a government-vetted water study, which included looking into the practices used by miners present in the area, home to some of the planet's largest copper and lithium deposits. And currently, BHP now draws 100% of the water for Escondida from the Pacific Ocean. The world's largest miner has vowed to stop using fresh water drawn from the surface and underground in Chile by 2030. So you can read all about that. They have a massive desalination plant, and they pipeline water 3,200 meters above sea level. So so it's not cheap. This is a $3.5 billion desalination plant. So that is what's going on with BHP. Meanwhile, scientists have developed a cheap and easy method to extract lithium from seawater, which is pretty interesting. This is by Valentina Ruiz Leotode. Researchers at King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in Saudi Arabia have developed what they believe is an economically viable system to extract high-purity lithium from seawater. Previous efforts to tease lithium from the mixture of the metal together with sodium, magnesium, and potassium in seawater yielded very little. Although the liquid contains 5,000 times more lithium than can be found on land, it is present at extremely low concentrations of about 0.2 parts per million. To address the issue, the team led by Ziping Lai tried a method that had never been used before to extract lithium ions. They employed an electrochemical cell containing a ceramic membrane made from lithium lanthanum titanium oxide. In a paper published in the journal in Energy and Environmental Science, the researchers explained that the membrane's crystal structure contains holes just wide enough to let lithium ions pass through while blocking larger metal ions. So you can read that in detail, but it sounds like a pretty amazing breakthrough there that could have pretty huge implications for the lithium market and maybe other markets as well. And we have a report here by Henry Lazenby, our new reporter at the Northern Miner, and miners to continue flying high through 2022, according to a new report from Fitch Solutions, and they are expecting, quote, an exceptional year of earnings through 2022. Despite sky-high earnings, Fitch expects miners to maintain restraint over capital expenditure, instead focusing on further debt reduction with the additional profits generated this year and next. According to the report, the industry is in the age of disruption with technology changing consumption patterns and environmental, social, and governance considerations shaping the future of market players and inevitably determining success or the contrary. I think Henry's absolutely right, or the writers of this report are absolutely right. What is going on in mining, if you had to take a very big picture perspective? Disruption by technology, it's finally happening, right? I mean, there's been talk about technology disruption in mining for a while. It has happened, it is happening. And ESG, environmental, social, and governance concerns. And that seems to be the two big themes if you asked what is going on in mining today. What is happening on a macro level? Disagree? Leave a comment in the comments, please. Always love to hear from people. So they are expecting very strong financial results. And finally, we have a story on how higher copper prices are reviving old deposits. And this is also by Henry Lazenby. And this is a very interesting idea, right? I mean, this is what James Dines, the great financial speculator, that's why he loves mining stocks, because a property can be absolutely worthless with silver at $10 an ounce, and it can become a mine at $20 an ounce silver. And so that's why you get these 2-cent stocks that go up to $1, and whatever the case might be, or why you get this enormous leverage, maybe 2 cents to 20 cents, or whatever the case might be. So that is what is happening with these old copper deposits. Now that the copper price is moving higher, you're seeing some interest in these smaller copper deposits, which were once forgotten. Just 2 examples include U.S. Copper, which has this week mobilized exploration crews to the Superior Copper Deposit in California, and Sweden-based Copperstone Resources, which has for the first time in 25 years opened and entered the former Viscaria copper mine site. So you can read about that story. It's pretty interesting, a micro view of kind of a macro situation. And Henry talks to the CEOs of those companies. Another interesting story from our new reporters. So those are your news stories. Now let's take a look at metal prices. Turning to metal prices, we'd like to thank our friends at mining.com/markets for providing us with these prices each and every week. And on June 8th, gold is trading at $1,895.08. That is $18 lower than last week's quote. Silver is trading at $27.73 per ounce. That is 51 cents lower than last week's quote, and platinum is trading at $1,167.09 per ounce. That is $27 lower than last week, and palladium is trading at $2,820.60 per ounce. That is $42 lower than last week's quote. And turning to our industrial metals, copper is trading at $4.47 per pound. That is 14 cents lower than last week's quote. Aluminum is unchanged at $1.09 per pound. Lead is 3 cents lower at 97 cents per pound. Nickel is 5 cents higher at $8.13 per pound. Tin is 20 cents lower at $14.98 per pound. And cobalt is 50 cents lower at $19.28 per pound. And zinc is at $1.35. That's 3 cents lower than last week. So what do we see? Commodity prices, although slightly lower, remain elevated and are all at their near-term highs. So, again, we look at the 10-year bond at 1.55%. The bond market would seem to suggest that they think that inflation is transitory. The commodities market, on the other hand, seems to be telling us a different story for the time being. It's pulled back a tiny bit. We shall see if that continues and if those prices are also transitory. That is the big question, and those are your metal prices. And coming up, we have a featured panel from the Global Mining Symposium in May, tackling technical debt with cloud-based technologies. And this features Anthony Downs, Head of Digital Transformation at Vale, and Dean Gehring, Executive Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at Newmont. And they are interviewed by Northern Miner senior reporter and science reporter Carl A. Williams. So delve deep into what is one of the most important aspects of a modern mining company, particularly those mining companies with several mines and operations. This is a must listen with some of the top talent in the world on this subject. So I hope you enjoy it, and we will see you on the other side.
Dean, Anthony, and all the delegates on our chat today. A warm welcome to you all. And I think this is going to be another fascinating insight into how the industry is transforming digitally and how going forward it's going to just become more and more part of current business operations. I thought I'd start off the discussion with a little bit of an insight into, we've got a report coming out very soon, the Northern Miner working with Amazon Web Services, Xeris, and Obscuro. We surveyed mining executives across the industry to get a sense of where they were with cloud technology. And what was quite insightful, I think it'd be a nice way to start, is 70% reported using cloud technology extensively, about a third occasionally, 27% use them frequently, and 60% reported never using them. So I think there's still a big gap. There's a long way to go in the understanding of the industry of cloud technologies and then actually implementing them. So first of all, the title is of our discussion, Tackling Technical Debt with Cloud-Based Technologies. Dean, if I can maybe come to you first, what do we mean by technical debt?
Well, what happens often, Carl, and I think it's probably the mining industry is a big offender of this, is when we spend money and invest money in cycles. When the commodity cycles are high, we'll tend to invest more. When they're not, they won't. And oftentimes what struggles is our computer infrastructure. And so, we need to be replacing our computer equipment, our infrastructure just as we would replace any other types of equipment we're operating in sites. Data centers is one of those things that if we're maintaining our own data centers, our own databases, the computers to store that data, and it starts to get old and out of cycle, we start to build up what we call a technical debt, meaning that we really need to replace that equipment. And if we don't replace it on a regular schedule, we start to experience outages. We start to fall behind on patches for software, which then causes us to fall behind on cybersecurity protections. And we just end up in this debt, or what we call the technical debt, of not being able to keep up with the technology and where we want to be as a company.
Thank you for that, Dean. I think that gives a clear idea that this is a big issue and is only going to get bigger for companies going forward as we mentioned, the technology become more available. Anthony, maybe I come to yourself for a moment. What would you say the key drivers for the industry are?
Our industry captures a phenomenal amount of data, day in and day out. And one of the key tricks is how do you unlock the value trapped in that data? So, there's a whole range of things that you can do with that data around simulation, around optimization, around using that data to predict future states, whether it be commodity price, whether it be asset health. There's a whole range of things. So what is typical in many mining companies is we have significantly more data being collected than we're actively using and getting value out of. And that's the focus, to try to unlock that trapped value.
Anthony, maybe if you could just expand a little bit on, again, focusing on the data side, which is what this is really all about at the end of the day. But if you could just maybe give a sort of bit of a sort of insight on where Vale is sort of, what is the benefit? It's all very well having this data, but what would you say is the sort of key area for yourselves at Vale where this has benefited yourselves?
So one of the key areas we're applying it to at the moment is around safety and risk reduction, and also around productivity. So in Canada, we have a significant portfolio of underground operations, and they're supported by a number of surface plants. What we've been doing recently is deploying LTE underground, really lighting that up, really getting that connectivity underground. And what that's allowing us to do in real time is take a number of disparate data feeds into, let's call it an air traffic control tower for our mine. And then we're able to understand, how are we tracking versus plan, being able to get the trigger action response plans in place. And we're looking at high double digits increase in productivity and significant decreases in incidences by better situational awareness, better understanding in real time what's happening with our people, what's happening with our equipment, and what's happening with the ore body that we're working in.
Dean, come to yourself. I would ask you the same question. If you could talk a little bit maybe about Newmont's journey with cloud computing. Where did it start? What were the motivations? And again, maybe highlight some of the key areas you think where it's really benefited the business.
Yeah, for us, it starts off with a really basic point that we just wanted to get out of the data center business. We had too many data centers around the world that we were trying to maintain, and they were being maintained to various levels. And we just weren't seeing the reliability that we wanted. And so for us, that was really the first step, is that we knew we could do better. We also started to recognize that you're able to support a cloud-based infrastructure so much easier than you can site-based infrastructures, in particular in remote areas. So not only were we seeing the costs go down for maintaining that, but also just the resources that were required. Then the knock-on benefits become, it helped assist us in standardization. So we've talked about, I think, Carl, you mentioned on the onset of your comments that the scalability of this technology is really important. Well, having standardization and then the scalability that can follow on from that really gives a lot of flexibility. So as Anthony mentioned, we collect a tremendous amount of data in this industry. And as we see new data sources come online, we can so easily flex cloud storage capabilities to respond to that. Finally, for us, it was cybersecurity enhancements. By having everything to a high level of standard, it supports better cybersecurity.
We'll come on to that question in a moment, actually, because that was quite a significant, as we surprised that data security is a huge issue. The recent survey showed that as well, in terms of different approaches by the companies, how piecemeal, how disjointed they are. So we'll come on to that in a moment. But Dean, maybe sticking with yourself for a moment. It sounds like a panacea in many ways, cloud computing, to a lot of problems. Anthony referred to health and safety, being able to track people. There's ESG implications right across the board. It's difficult to find a part of the business where in some way cloud computing can't enhance the efficiency of those business processes. But what would you say are the main challenges that you faced in Newmont when you started down this road of bringing cloud computing in? I know many times as a consultant, I would talk to companies about technologies, and there's an incredulity factor you have to get beyond with companies. I wonder if you could maybe talk to that for a moment, some of the key major challenges you faced.
Yeah, Carl, most of our sites are very accustomed to operating autonomously. They need to have that ability to control their destiny. And so one of the challenges is just that fear of losing control. When you start to tell people your data storage isn't going to be on site, it's actually going to be in the cloud, and they don't really know where that is. And it's hard for people to necessarily understand what does that mean and what's their accountabilities and how reliable is it going to be. And so it's helping people, through that, just through a very disciplined and focused change management process, bringing people along for the journey. The other challenge that comes in is the bandwidth to some of our more remote sites, and having that ability to make people comfortable that we're not only removing your data off site, but you'll still be able to get it. So that's another challenge that we had to help people with. And one of the things that we did along those lines is we standardized our global solution providers, making sure that the bandwidth pipes were very big, going to our sites as big as possible, to try to remove that risk and concern that the people at the sites had for losing their data. But what I can say is that once we got past that, it was a very quick transition when people started to recognize the step change and improvement that they were seeing because of taking those steps.
Anthony, I put the same question to you. From your experience of Vale with the introduction of or implementation of cloud and cloud-based technologies, I want to say the sort of really headline challenges you've faced and maybe still are facing in terms of getting that adoption within inside the company and the implementation of these solutions.
Well, I'd say we're pretty much spot on in alignment with Dean and his team, right? So it's the operational leadership not fully understanding what the cloud is, how it works, and being concerned about not being able to walk down the hall, open a door, and kind of point at this big box that has their data in it, right? And they're saying it's going to the cloud, etc. There's a level of unknowingness in there that you really need that change management. But just like Dean, once we got some use cases going, once we started doing it, the comfort level quickly grew. And today, a lot of the operational leaders, are comfortable with it and probably don't even necessarily want to enter into a discussion about where is their data, because they're comfortable. They know they can access it, and they know that it's got the right level of security around it.
I think that's going to be a common experience for a lot of companies that have gone down this road, or when they do, I think they're going to encounter them pretty early in that process. One of the interesting outcomes from the survey I mentioned earlier on, which we'll have a report on the North Miner website coming sooner, is that 31% or sort of a third of the respondents said that budgetary constraints were the biggest problem with uptaking or implementing new solutions. I don't think that's probably the biggest surprise. Maybe what surprises me that figure wasn't higher. And also as well, concerns of data security came in sort of second place with about a fifth of respondents. Anthony, sticking with yourself for the moment, you faced these challenges. What strategy did you adopt as the head of digital transformation at Vale? How did you approach those who may be rather skeptical, or again that knowledge gap in the black box element that is cloud? How did you overcome that sort of reluctance to go down this road? Maybe we could just talk to some of the strategies to help others out there.
As Dean was referring to, traditionally in technology, it's been very much kind of a wave type investment, right? So you make a large investment, get everything up to date, and then it deteriorates over time to a point where you can't bear to let it deteriorate anymore. And then you kind of have that spike back up, and then you let it deteriorate again. And most of the time that's capital, right? And you're competing with capital for the new SAG mill, you're competing with capital for new tank lining, you're competing with capital across the whole operating business. What cloud computing allows you to do is to turn that OPEX, that capital spend into an operating expense, right? So it's like paying your phone bill, it's like paying your electric bill. And what we've found is that as you get more advanced in the way that you're using cloud, it's very much like paying the phone bill, right? So it's not a fixed cost. If you're using more computing because you're doing some simulation models or some optimization models and you need more computing power for the month, you pay for it. If you're not running those models for the next 3 months, then you don't pay for it. It's a consumption-based model. And you need to work with your partners to kind of model that out, right? So there's sophisticated Excel spreadsheets, etc., where you kind of map out what you predict your usage will be, and it will clearly show you in a predictable way what your costs are going to be. And as Dean said, the key thing is the overhead to run cloud, right? The number of people that you need, the number of people you need to focus on keeping it running can potentially be at a very different level than what your traditional IT structure might look like.
Dean, what strategies did you adopt to influence those budget holders within the organization there to get them to either at least consider cloud or to go down that road?
Well, for us, it was twofold. One, going back to the waves of spending that Anthony mentioned, if you can time that right, and you're saying we're at a point where we need to make a large capital investment and we're not going to do that, rather we're going to switch some of that to operating costs and buy a service versus buy the hardware, it actually shows up as a savings. So we were able to do that. We were at a point where we needed to make some investment and we chose to take a different route. So that was actually something that the organization was very keen to do. So if you're not in that sort of timing, it can be more challenging. And then the other point, again, what Anthony mentioned is we developed use cases and we staged the implementation. It's not something that you have to do, the entire organization has to adopt overnight. You can look at it on a site by site or even take subcomponents of a site. So it really allows itself to be staged in a way to help the organization be able to digest what it has the capacity to digest during that time.
I think that gives some really good insight for those companies out there who are now looking to either start that journey or some way down it in order to adopt those strategies to get buy-in from the powers to be. Coming back to the data security, which is always going to be an issue, I don't think that's ever going to go away. For as long as we've got people who want to hack systems, they're going to have systems that are going to be hackable. But there are strategies that companies can employ to protect their systems. Again, coming back to the information that we gleaned from those surveys, a lot of the respondents there were actually saying that they're either not taking any actions to secure their systems, they didn't know what they were, and when they did, it was rather piecemeal. So maybe, Anthony, coming to yourself here, how do you approach the subject of data security?
In the context of storing our data and leveraging our data in the cloud, we're confident the major cloud providers have a level of sophistication in both their security teams and their monitoring tools that would far exceed anything that we as a global mining company could bring to the table ourselves. That's not to say that we as users of that cloud service can't do silly things, right? Like weak passwords or no passwords or, misusing the tools, right? You can still get yourself in trouble if you do, silly things. But the overall environment that our data is being stored in is significantly more secure because the big cloud providers in reality can't afford for things to go wrong, right? Microsoft, AWS, those guys couldn't afford for significant issues, and therefore they invest in the right skills, the right tools to make sure that the data they're holding is going to be secured. Just to emphasize again, if you Google AWS cyber, you'll find that there are events, but they're kind of drawn back to misusing the system rather than weaknesses in the system itself.
Sure. To a large extent then, Anthony, would it be fair to say that you're kind of outsourcing your data security needs to the cloud provider?
No, my cybersecurity team would kind of freak out if we were to say that. So look, we do have a highly skilled internal cybersecurity team that's overlooking everything that we do, including the cloud. But the security of the cloud and the data in the cloud isn't in their top 10, probably not even in their top 50 concerns. There are lots of other things that the internal cybersecurity team is focusing their attention on.
Sure. Dean, what if you could talk to that as well? Data security, what's Newmont doing themselves? What's their strategy?
Well, the way I look at this is that the protection offered by the cloud as it relates to cybersecurity is just an additional layer of protection. So it's not the end all and be all of protection, so much what Anthony mentioned. The other thing that I think is really important is if you think about, as Anthony mentioned, we can do silly things. And those silly things in many cases, in the worst case for us, leads to some sort of ransomware attack where your information is actually locked up. And this is becoming a very prolific type of attack. You can open up the newspapers and see it almost weekly that some major company or government's been struck this way. And what happens to those that don't know, it's actually the data is locked up. You can't use it. You can see it, but you can't access it. And then you get an email from somebody saying, if you want to access us, pay us this much in Bitcoin. We'll give you the security code and you can get it. If your data is backed up well, you're not worried by that. You're saying, I don't need it because I have it elsewhere. And that's something that I think the cloud storage helps with. We all, in the past, with our on-site data storage, we always put these cascading backup systems in place, and we thought we had it backed up. But you didn't have to press very hard to find out that they often weren't being used very well. Where in a cloud system, the backups are just so much better than I've ever seen any mining company actually do well. So if you do have an event, you actually have a way to recover from that event.
I think this is really interesting, Dean. I'd like to stay with you for a moment because we've got an interesting question that's come in. I was going to wait for the end for the Q&A with our delegates, but I think this is a good timing for this question. One of our participants today on the panel discussion has asked if you could talk about what the risk presented by large power outages on operations that are cloud dependent, and then by extrapolation, what the risk of that is to data security. Have you had this situation, or could you talk to in a more general terms about that question?
Yeah, so the way that we're using cloud storage, it's not to operate the plants. It's really pulling data that's being generated and using that in ways to help track and provide predictive analytics for what we can do differently. And that was something Anthony mentioned earlier. So there is an independent link between the data that's required to operate the plant that's localized at site versus how that data is then being pulled into the cloud to be used for other reasons.
Anthony, if you could maybe respond to that as well, please.
Yeah, so to Dean's point, the cloud isn't the be all and end all, right? So it's not going to be the solution for everything. And like Dean and his team, we're not using cloud-based systems to control our surface plants, to control critical systems on site. Having said that, having the data stored in the cloud and not on a particular operating site means if there's an issue on that site, from power or any other issue, you can still get access to that data from other locations, right? So if we have an issue in one particular operations and there's no power to that data center anymore, and we were fortunate enough to move the data to the cloud, then we can still get access from another, from Toronto, from Brazil, from another one of our locations, and access the information we need that, may actually be very key in the recovery of that site back to full operations. So having that data kind of sitting securely externally to the physical operating site, does have some distinct advantages.
Anthony, maybe sticking with yourself for a moment as well. We've got another very interesting question come in. Do you see a time that where companies will expect contractors or suppliers to the industry to have a certain cloud infrastructure and cybersecurity in place, and use that maybe as a leverage to be the preferred supplier?
So we take an interest in the cybersecurity of our key partners, right? Because it's a connected ecosystem, right? And you'll see some cybersecurity stories on the internet where very large retailers have been hacked by IoT in an aquarium, for example, right? So these people will find the weakest link that may not be you, but be a pathway to you. So yes, we want our key vendors to be as secure as we are. We don't have a preference on which cloud provider they use, or in fact today if they use a cloud provider. But I don't think it's going to be potentially an issue. The various clouds are interconnected enough. You can handle it no matter what provider they end up using. But to your key point, yes, we want to make sure that our partners aren't going to be a vulnerability for us via a weaker cybersecurity stance than what we have.
Dean, I'd put the same question to yourself. Are you making moves to ask your vendors or even make them preferred vendors if they do have this cybersecurity infrastructure and are using clouds to provide in some way their services to you?
Yeah, it's similar to Anthony's comment. We do have an expectation of certain levels of cybersecurity that they have to be maintained. But also we have a segmentation approach to our network where we don't, not all data is treated the same. Not all access is treated the same. So we will compartmentalize the access that certain vendors get so they can't, if they do something silly, it doesn't have a cascading effect onto our network.
And I think, if I'm right in saying that we've got time for maybe one more question here, and it's come back to, not surprisingly, the issue of cybersecurity. What happens when you are hacked? And I wouldn't ask either of you to go into any Greek detail if either of your respective companies have had that experience, but maybe speaking in a theoretical future where that may happen, what access do they get to the data?
So, well, I can kick that off. We were very fortunate to be able to hire a former Microsoft employee that worked in their cyber protection area for 20 years as our senior director of cyber. And so I've learned a lot about cybersecurity. I mean, that is not my background. I've had to learn a lot about it. I've learned a lot from him. And I've asked that same question. And that's why I have a little bit of understanding. If you are hacked, typically what happens is that, and they use a lot of military type terms. I mean, they'll deploy a payload in your system that'll sit dormant for maybe weeks, and then it'll start to spread out across your system silently, and then it'll go active. And people, what they typically notice is they can't access their data and they don't know what's happening. Then they call IT. IT looks and realizes, oh, there's an encryption on this that we can't open. And then you'll get a note from somebody, oftentimes in Eastern Europe, that will say, if you want your data back, here's how much Bitcoin you need to send us.
Anthony?
Yeah, so just talking generally, and again, if people want to dive in, there's some fairly easily Google searches will get you some insights. But look, I think there are a number of nation states and others who have an interest in understanding what mining companies are doing, what their finances are like, what their future plans are like, so that they can leverage that to their advantage. And there are a range of actors that have either commercial gain or intellectual gain by getting into other systems. We have a level of monitoring, we have a level of proactiveness where we're watching for unusual things that occur. We have a trigger action response plan to handle those as they occur. We've tried to design and engineer with security in mind, right? Just like you would when you're building a physical plant. So as Dean alluded to, we have segmentation, for example. So it's not just an open door. If you come in through the window, you can get to the whole place. It's segmented up. And that's one of the many controls we have in place to kind of contain and manage any potential risk that we have.
Anthony, Dean, many thanks indeed.
Thanks, Carl.
Thanks for having us.
Dean.
So thank you to Anthony and Dean and Carl for a great panel. We have more to come. Hope you're having a wonderful start to the summer. The drama continues. And if you want to help out the podcast, leave us a review in the Apple Podcast directory. Leave us a like on YouTube. And until next week, take care. This episode of the Northern Miner Podcast is brought to you by Revival Gold and their Bear Track Arnett Gold Project in Idaho. If you want to learn more about Revival Gold, you can find them at revival-gold.com, and you can find them on the TSX Venture Exchange at RVG and on the over-the-counter markets at RVLGF.